to order, to make sure that I have everybody. It looks like I have all of my council or my Board of Finance members here, and Alice is in here somewhere as well. So let me go ahead and call this meeting to order. For the record, it is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. It is now 5:00 p.m. This is a special meeting of the Board of Finance. And this is a meeting for the purposes of discussing budgets, budget adoption, and mill rate setting. Item number 1 on the agenda is the presentation of written comments from the public. As per the request of a number of Board of Finance members, we did ask that the comments be limited to Torrington residents. So I don't know, John, are you and Carol reading, or?
Yeah, that'll just be me tonight.
Okay, all right. So then item 1 is you. Go ahead.
All right, and before I begin, do you have Christopher Anderson on the phone? I don't see him as a participant on the.
He did say he was going to be calling in. Chris, can you unmute yourself and announce?
Oh, actually, I think this is him joining now.
Okay.
So I'll just get him on board, and then I'll start reading off the comments.
Okay.
I have told you 3 times already. There's not time for that. Get in the car.
3 times. That's the limit for any parent.
Yeah. All right, hold on. Okay, well, I will begin. Let's see, first comment we have from Michael forgive me, this is going to be a tough one. Michael McGillicuddy. And he is of 675 Heron Drive in Torrington. He says, good evening. I'm the father of 3 students. Thank you to the Board of Education for preparing a thoughtful and fiscally responsible budget that will provide every student in Torrington what they need and deserve. The city needs to make a commitment to our students, residents, and community to make Torrington Public Schools everything that our children need. Every child in the city would benefit from smaller class sizes, improved support staff and services, enrichment opportunities, better facilities, and the ability to participate in our nationally recognized music program. For years to come, students will need help from teachers and support people, those who are in direct contact with the children in order to overcome any learning gaps due to the pandemic. It is irresponsible to take educators away from children. From kindergarten through grade 12, our students deserve the best education we can give them. The budget should be approved as presented. Please support the Board of Education proposed budget and give every Torrington child an outstanding public education. Next one is from Glenn Royals. And he says, Mayor Carbone, I am not happy that in times like now, I am sending this to you with the crazy schedule you are leading, but I must share my dismay and disgust with what I'm hearing about our budget. How can anyone in their right mind expect to keep asking for more over-the-top spending? We should be looking for the most lean spending we have ever witnessed, possibly since the Depression. Lean spending has to be introduced immediately. Overspending in general, especially Board of Education, has to stop. They are totally out of control even before the epidemic, and now worse. Did anybody ever think we have to tighten our belts to the max? We have $70 million bill for our sewer plant upgrade, $1 million in road repaving and construction. My figures may not be exact on the road work, but you can see where I'm going. The Board of Education think and have always thought that the money comes out of a hat. Well, the well is dry. Now I'm hearing that we need a new high school middle grades rooms at the high school, and the Board of Education is looking for funds for this. Are you crazy? In case you are all wondering, the education has not come out of our old school buildings, making them worthless. In case you do not read, our school system is one of the lowest percentiles in the state of Connecticut for a good education. And more money does not make it better, which if you look at the last 20 plus years, spending has increased year by year in leaps and bounds. It is time to regroup, get rid of the dead weight, and run the system as a business, not a pastime, paying for the same mistakes over and over. Freeze and cut all spending to pay for what we are really getting. We have to have the final say with a vote in front of the council and finance boards, making the final decision basing the decision on what Torrington can afford, not what our Board of Education wants. One more word. It is great to hear Mr. Christopher Bias speak up and know what he is talking about for the real good of the city. Glenn Royals, disgusted taxpayer. All right, next one is from Sharon Purell. And let's just get a few more people into the meeting. Sharon says, good evening. As a taxpayer and a parent of 2 children in Torrington schools, I'm writing to implore you to refrain from making any cuts to the proposed school budget for the next academic school year. Here we are engaging in the perennial debate. How do we do more with less? As a teacher and parent, knowing what faces all of us next year, we simply cannot do more with less. Uncertainty surrounds all of us in education. What will school days look like? How many children will be in classes? How will we fund the necessary precautions? We need to be talking about how we provide more funding to Torrington schools, not less, even more so now than ever. In a typical year, I'd be arguing with you about preserving funding for music or the arts or athletics. I'm not going to even waste my time talking about all those necessary components of a well-rounded education. Can we all just agree that our children deserve small class sizes, professionally developed teachers, tons of enrichment opportunities, etc.? Now is not the time to cut corners or bricker over essentials. Everything our children's education requires is essential. Do what is right. You have an obligation to fully fund the proposed education budget for 2021. If we enter next year already scrimping, I fear the repercussions. Our children deserve better. You are obligated to do better. Please do better. All right, next one is from Tony Willez, also of Torrington. Hi, members of Torrington City Council. So this was initially submitted to the City Council, but also to the Board of Finance due to its relevance to the budget. Regarding matters related to the education budget, I am a retired elementary school teacher. I worked for 27 years in the West Hartford school system. Presently, I am opposed to any increase in the education budget. The reasons are the median household income for West Hartford is $95,298, and for Torrington, it's $61,313. Yet the salaries of teachers in Torrington are comparable to teachers in West Hartford. Torrington cannot afford to pay the teachers in Torrington the same rate of pay as teachers in West Hartford. The test scores of Torrington students are not comparable to West Hartford students. Torrington scores are significantly lower. Although poverty is the root cause for low scores, Torrington is not addressing the poverty issue with significant and/or innovative programs that deal with the needs of poverty-stressed students. The teachers union in Torrington is not prioritizing funding for significant or innovative programs for poverty-stressed students. The teachers union in Torrington is not prioritizing professional training for the delivery of significant or innovative programs for poverty-stressed students. The administration of Torrington schools for the past 20 years has been in constant state of chaos and change, resulting in a lack of any consistent education vision. The Board of Education, the administration, teachers union, and taxpayers have not, in my opinion, demonstrated that education for poverty-stressed children needs a drastic overhaul as to how education is delivered in Torrington. When all 4 education groups demonstrate that how children are taught is more important than salary increases, I will once again support an increase in the education budget. I want Torrington to be a leading district, just like it once was the showcase of the gifted and talented support services. All right, next one is from Stephen Jensen. This one's a little difficult to read. If the unions that feed at the city's TRO won't give up raises at this time, cut the number of positions need. This is for teachers, firemen, police, and city workers. Torrington cannot raise taxes, period. All right, and the last one is from someone who is not a Torrington resident. So that's all for tonight.
Okay. I will jump right into item number 2. I don't need a motion for this. It's just a discussion and a recap of where we are in budgets as presented. Some of the discussions about based on prior meetings and discussion on revenues and some of those one-time revenue sources that we can utilize. And I know that Alice is on the line, and I might ask her just to unmute herself so that if there are questions that she can answer, if questions that I may not be able to answer. So I'm going to start with where we stand with the spending plans that have been presented to the Board of Finance. I'm starting with the Board of Education. So the Board of Education budget as it was presented, and I know that the Board of Education did go through an exercise of finding and identifying cuts to bring their operating expenses down to 2.5%, but they have not taken any of the actions necessary to accept and approve those cuts. So where we stand right now, as presented to the Board of Finance, the Board of Education's operating spending plan was $78,300,892. The Board of Education's capital plan, as it stands right now, is $1,515,200. So the total presented spending plan was $79,816,092. The cuts that would be necessary to bring that budget spending plan to 2.5% is $2,838,499. And that just gets to the 2.5%, which we know is not sufficient to get us to no mill rate increase. The city budget presented at level 1 was $60,574,293. Cuts that have been approved by the city council through level 4 were $3,934,311. So what the Board of Finance has before it as a council approved spending plan is $56,639,982. I'll say that again, $56,639,982. The cuts that are necessary to get that budget to the 2.5% would be another $520,849. And again, at 2.5%, we're not looking at an impact to the mill rate. Revenues, and this is usually where I rely on Alice to help guide me through this. So what we have by way of tax revenues are, I'm sorry, I have an echo in there, and I'm sorry. So net, no, I should start with the state grants. The revenues that would be coming in by way of state grants is $37,826,878. Alice, am I looking at that right? I'm assuming she's on. Oh, there she is.
I'm here, Mayor. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. So
Okay.
I just wanted to go through the revenue side. Do you want to walk through the revenue side on the spreadsheet?
Which spreadsheet am I looking at, Mayor?
So it's it's that large, 8.5 by 17 each sheet where, and what I wanted to identify was the, grant and state revenues, in the middle, in that, that middle box that shows where the Board of Finance would need to be looking, for way of a budget adoption. So I'm looking at $37,826,878. Those are the grant revenues and other, department revenues.
Yes, the 34,226,878 are the revenues from the grants, motor vehicle supplemental, and different department revenues.
Okay. The other one-time revenue sources that we were looking at and were identified at the meeting last week would be the utilization of fund balance and the utilization of the transfer in from the internal service fund. And what we'd be looking at for the transfer in from the internal service fund was the $2 million that we discussed last week. And what we're looking at by way of fund balance would be the $3,600,000. And I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on that $3.6 million. You'll recall last week we identified that $2.5 million is where we are currently. That would bring us just a shade or tad above the 10% policy range. After meeting with the Board of Finance, the Board of Education, to discuss the Fund 282, where we can transfer all of their COVID-related expenses out of their current operating budget, which gave them a clearer picture of what their projected surpluses, year-end surpluses would be. They did identify that utilizing that process, that they would be in a position to end their year with a $710,000 surplus. So at the bottom of the document, you'll see under column D, where it identifies a surplus for the Board of Education, you're looking at the $700,000. You'll also notice in column E, we've identified the $400,000 worth of COVID-related expenses that have already been expended, and that those two numbers with the 2.5 million brings us to the 3.6. So those are the funding streams that we would be looking at to offset the spending plans that have been presented. Utilizing those revenues together with the tax revenues of at a mill rate, level mill rate, would mean we need to find another $280,000 in cuts. And if we split those between the Board of Education and the city, we would be looking at a budget approval for the Board of Education at $75,100,091, or a 2.31% increase. And
Mayor,
for the, yeah,
that would be the 76,837,593.
what did I say? 75.1. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah, I'm looking at the 2019-20. Thank you, Alice. So that would be the $76,837,593. And that's a 2.31% increase over last year. And for the city, it would be $56,379,133, which is a 2.24% increase. Do you want me to read those again? Okay. And again, what I'd say is, based on those initial attempts to get us to the 2.5%, which does not get us the 0 mill rate increase, each of the city and the Board of Education would just have to go and find an additional 140,000. Questions or comments?
Mayor, it's Laureen.
Yes.
Originally, you said $520,849 of cuts to the city budget. And now you're saying 200 and something thousand. I'm confused. I don't know if anybody else is, and if I'm the only one, then it's my problem.
So from what I needed, the $520,849 are the cuts that I need to get to 2.5%. To get to that point where there's no impact on the mill rate, I would have to find another 140,000.
That's in addition to that. So that's okay. That was where I was confused.
Yes.
Because we were talking a week ago of in the neighborhood of $750,000 on each side, BOE and city side.
So, and keep in mind that last week when we were talking, we were not in a position to talk about what the potential Board of Education surpluses would be. And as I identified a little bit earlier, what they did is, after moving their COVID-related expenses out of their operating budget, identified $710,000 of additional, I don't want to call it revenue, additional resources that we can use to offset those budget increases. I think what I was looking at is between the 520 and the 140, where I needed to be to get to 0, which is about 660. Which I am still working on.
Thank you.
Other questions on where we're going? Or thoughts?
So, Mayor, I'm not sure. Christopher Anderson, am I still muted? I've been going on and off.
No, you're in. You're on.
Okay, great. Sorry, it's different when you're on a screen versus on the phone, and I'm not sure if the controls are the same. But no, this does track from our last conversation, because we were looking at substantial cuts to keep things as flat as possible. And if I'm hearing right, what's on the table today, what's been submitted, does not yet include the additional cuts that were requested. So we're then looking at several million from the internal service fund and then several more million from the fund balance, plus an additional amount that wasn't used from last year to basically be used in lieu of additional cuts, correct? And just want to make sure I'm following this right. So the city side was looking for $500,000 or $600,000 of additional cuts to keep the city side flat. The board had a much bigger pie. So we basically come up with, am I looking at this right? $4 or $5 million from the internal service and general fund to allocate about $400,000, $500,000 to the city side, and then the rest of that to the Board of Ed for what they need. Is that the way it's breaking down? So
yes, what we would be looking from the fund balance based on surpluses that this, you'll recall we were looking at, originally we were looking at our fund balance and where our year-end projections were going to be. We used $2 million last year. So when we were first looking at revenue, we were reducing our revenues by that $2 million. And then as you know, as we move through this process and we identify, all right, so how much of that $2 million did we use? What is the city's projected year-end surpluses? That was the 1.9, almost $2 million of surpluses that will be returned to the fund balance. And as I said earlier, once you move those COVID-related expenses out of the Board of Ed side, what were the Board of Education's projected surpluses? And that's where that $710,000 came in. So our fund balance, as you know, has really been unimpacted from last year to this year. And that's why we're comfortable saying that that $2 million that we originally identified is available. We could go a little deeper and go, last week we were talking about 2.5. And then after getting the numbers from the Board of Education, between their COVID expenses and their surplus, feel comfortable at 3.6 coming out of fund balance. That still leaves us with just a shade over 10%. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about why our recommendation is to hold steady at that number. As you heard, one of the letters that was read a little bit earlier about the concern that there is about what does the Board of Education's budget look like for a COVID response in the next school year. When they prepared their spending plan, obviously, you know, this was done in January and February. They were planning for a regular school year, you know, a regular school day, no additional impact on transportation. And what they're hearing now and what we're hearing from them is we don't know what that's going to look like. You know, is it going to be a split day and their transportation expenses are going to increase? Is it an A-B day where you have kids coming every other day? Will there be some measure of distance learning? So the state has really not given them clear guidance on what the expectations are. So we want to make sure that in our fund balance, we don't go so deep to offset these spending plans now that we don't have sufficient reserves above the 7% to cover any of those unforeseen expenses. We want to be reserved enough to be able to respond to whatever that state guidance is after this budget adoption. The same thing holds true with the internal service fund. You'll recall we had that we went through that whole fund. You know, what are the projected expenses going forward? What are our reserves? Are we comfortable going at 100% of those projected expenses, utilizing some of our reserve to transfer in and offset this mill rate? And based on all of those numbers, and again, partially as a result of this pandemic, when our employees and their family members were not out seeking those, you know, those medical, the medical care, whether it was an elective surgery, whether it was dental care, whether it was, you know, a wellness visit at their physician. We looked at those reserves much more closely and are comfortable pulling in $2 million from that reserve fund. So between the tax revenues, the state grants, and other department revenues, the $3.6 million from fund balance and the $2 million from fund balance, we can fund the spending plans at 2.3 and 2.24% respectively, Board of Education and city, without impacting the mill. Other questions? Thank you.
Sorry, Christopher again. From some of the articles and things I was reading, I know the credit raters and they don't really they prefer not to see funds spent on operating expenses. Is it too soon to start talking about how the fund might be replenished if we end up using these amounts?
No, I don't think it's ever too soon to discuss. So, I mean, the good news is, and one of the important things to remember is when we adopted that policy that said that our goal was to get this fund balance to always hover between 7 and 10%. You know, over 10%, we want to make sure that we are returning to the taxpayers any of those surpluses, any of that excess. It's taxpayers' money at the end of the year when we haven't spent, you know, we end up with a surplus, we haven't spent all of the funds. It's taxpayers' money, and finding a way to return it to the taxpayers or give the taxpayer a benefit it's a good practice. When we do have those S&P rating calls and we do go through that interview process, if we can also explain to the raters that these one-time uses or opportunities are tied to those one-time expenses. You know, in the city's budget, you know, we have, you know, a roof that needs to be repaired. We have a 53rd pay period that can be, you know, those so-called one-time expenses. And though they may appear in our operating budget, they are one-time. So what we usually try to do is we'll identify what those one-time sources are and tie it directly to that one-time use of the fund balance. And I could say that the same thing could hold true with the Board of Education's capital plan. You know, many of those expenses are one-time expenses that certainly if next year those funds are not available, it wouldn't impact their operating expenses. You'll see when I bring forward later on at a future meeting after I meet with the council for deliberation, some of those expenses that we may identify that will get us to that $660,000 cut I need to make may require a planned restoration of that expense. So if I'm not funding our vehicle replacement accounts, you know, I usually come back with a plan for a 4-year restoration of the funding. And those are, you know, those are discussions that I usually bring to both the Board of Finance and the City Council.
Right.
And
thank you.
Yeah, and philosophically, I'll say that I always look at it through the lens of a 4-year plan or something shorter than a 4-year plan. Our budget cycles, you know, every 4 years, I think there's just too much that changes in a 4-year period of time. It's under the 5-year period of time for any revaluation. So always when Alice and I sit down and look at these things, that's sort of the lens that we view it through. Other questions on either the spending plans or the
Mayor, Chris Bay is just quickly, when we're going forward, and I thank you and obviously my fellow board members for really honing in on this and coming up with something that's fair to both sides. I just think we have to be cautious, especially at this time with cuts, especially in the police department area. You know, obviously, I want to ensure that the men and women who protect our streets day in and day out are you know, have the equipment necessary to protect the community. So just as we move forward and as we look at those cuts, my only recommendation is just to keep that in mind. But thank you, and Alice, for the work you've done so far this year.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Right.
This is Laureen again. I know that this budget process this year has been truncated for reasons beyond our control. But we started on this back in February and March. And it's uncomfortable for me, even after all this time, to be getting to this point of now, and now we're in June, so we don't have any more time to think about this any further, to realize that both the city and the Board of Ed, for us to get to this 0 mil, have significant amounts of money that they have to cut from their budgets. And so we're approving tonight budgets that we don't really know what they are, because there are going to be additional changes to them. And it would seem to me that going forward, I would want us to get to tonight where we know, because we, and at this point, the city council had asked for a 0 increase. What does that really mean? What are we giving up in order to get to the 0? Or conversely, we have decided this year to increase the budgets somewhat. So we're using the fund balance, we're using the internal services funds, and those are important decisions that we've already made. But it's still, in order to get to the 0 mil, there are still spending cuts that are going to be made. And at this point, we don't know, the city council doesn't know, the citizens of Torrington, the taxpayers don't know what those additional cuts are going to be. So I hope going forward that we could get to a point so that at this night, when we're setting the mill rate, if I'm still involved, that I actually know what both budgets are and what they are going to fund. And then we would go from there. If during the year changes need to be made, that's a different story. But sitting tonight and still not exactly knowing what the funds are going to be spent on is not comfortable for me. Thank you.
No, and I hear you. I would just remind the board that when we did have the joint meeting with the Board of Education, they did identify what those
Yes.
cuts were going to be to get them to the 2.5% of their operating.
Yes, they have done that, but now there's additional funds. But still, they did identify those, but since they haven't actually voted on that, those may not necessarily be the final expenses that they decide to fund in their budgets.
Mayor,
Other
this is Mark.
questions?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mark.
along a good point that Lorraine made, specifically, for example, the Board of Ed, they've made great strides with the special ed, bringing things in-house. And my fear kind of is if they, depending where they cut, they could be taking a step backward in that area. And for years, we've been asking them to take care of special ed, take care of special ed. And they finally are making progress on that. And my fear is a step backward if we, depending where they allocate their cuts.
Mayor, this is Lance.
Lance.
So to kind of mirror what the last two board members have said, just looking at the budgets, when we look at the percent of the increase, one of the numbers I saw was 94% of the increase were due to contractual obligations. So in other words, salary and benefits. So we keep talking about what are the programs that are going to be cut, what are the things that aren't going to be done. But the reality is that's not happening anyway, because the increases are basically only funding the contractual obligations. So I think until we get a handle on how those contracts are handled, we're going to be right back in this same situation. So we're talking about currently a 2.31 and a 2.24% increase. And we're going to offset that in essence out of the fund balance. But again, reality is the only things that are being funded are the contracts, or 94, 95% of it. So when we talk about what's not being added, what's not, I'm still unclear. And maybe, I don't, maybe this is what Ms. Pesky was getting at, is I'm not exactly sure what's not being done, because I wasn't really sure what was going to be done to begin with, because 94% are contractual obligations. So that's my concern. And I feel like we're in a little bit of a vicious circle here, where every year we have these, I'm going to call them mandated increases. And we have a situation currently in the state of Connecticut, 515,000 people have filed for unemployment in the last 2 months. 29,000 people just last week. Boeing has announced 6,800 layoffs. And the Northwest Corner, we're a big feeding group into the aerospace. So I'm very concerned what next year is going to look like from a revenue standpoint, from a capability of paying standpoint. And I'm getting a little frustrated, to be honest, with the talk of what we're not going to get, when I'm really not sure what was on the plate to begin with.
Mayor, Jim Wright.
Oops.
Address, Lance's issues.
Jim, you're really cavitating.
I'm sorry. I'll stop.
Somebody else has got to mute.
Is that better?
Is everybody muted?
Okay.
Mayor, maybe try yours. Go ahead, Jim. Jim, you're muted.
Am I talking now? Okay. I'm sorry.
Try your own speakers down. Let me try it again, Jim.
Better? Can you hear me? Okay, all I was going to say is the bulk of the educational as of being a teacher is the personnel. So what's being cut is the personnel was really, in my mind, what makes the school. The teachers makes the school. The policemen and the firemen on the beat make the safety. So I understand Lance's concerns, but I think that's one of the things that I think you can look at is if we're holding still on that or help doing that, that's to me somewhat of a positive or some positive way to look at it.
Thank you. All right, so we're still on item 2. Other questions or comments or direction you want to give me?
Mayor, just one quick thing. I was looking at the Board of Ed's capital budget, and there was looked like some sync funding for turf replacement for $100,000. I'd maybe recommend to the Board of Education that be an item that's included in their cuts moving forward.
So, yeah, I can certainly reach out to the Board of Education on that. I know that the boards of education can't sync funds. I think that that's something we can talk with them about. I know there's a that shelf life to that turf field. But I could certainly, I think there are a number of board members on the line, but we could certainly make that recommendation to them.
Thank you.
Other thoughts or questions before I move into the next line item? So I guess we'll just move into, what's my agenda? Sorry, folks. I'll move into item 3, which would require a roll call vote. And the roll call vote, if still the Board of Finance's plan to move this proposal forward with no impact to the mill rate, then the vote I would be looking for in regard to the Board of Education fiscal year 2020-2021 operating and capital budgets in the total amount of $76,837,593, representing a 2.31% increase over the current fiscal year, with a request that the Board of Education within 30 days report back to the Board of Finance on how those funds would be appropriated between capital and operating.
So moved.
Thank you.
Sorry, were you calling for the Christopher?
That was Christopher Anderson that made the motion.
Mayor, second.
And a second by Mr. Bayes. Discussion.
Unmute Lance.
Again, I guess my biggest concern is just the uncertainty about next year. I think we can put the best plan out there. I think one of the things that we're going to have to be conscious of from a board perspective and from a city's perspective is we are in very challenging, extraordinary times, and we might have to be extremely flexible in August. And we might have to go back on what we decide tonight and say, we have new information and it's just not going to work this way.
Chris Bayes. Lance, I see what you're saying, and I think every other town and city in the entire state and probably most of the country is in the same boat as us at this point, and have the same exact concerns that you have and that I share and that we all share. I don't want to say we're all in this together, but I think that, like I said, we share that same concern with just about every other city and town in this state. So
with that being said, I think one of the things that I would like to see moving forward from all of, the Board of Ed, the police department, the city, what's their plan B? If this happens, what do they do? If this happens, what do they do? So we've got plan A, in essence, in front of us. But what does a hybrid program look like? What does a split shift program look like? I'm sure they're all working on that. But having an understanding what the financial implication could look like, just looking at trying to be proactive.
So if I may, and that's exactly what they are doing. When I met with the superintendent and the board chair last week, those were the exact questions and discussions we were having. First off, establishing this COVID line item where COVID-related expenses can be charged to, so that we can track those expenses and advocate for alternate funding, whether it's through FEMA or a CARES Act, or through Department of Housing. This week I learned that through Department of Housing and the Small Cities program that we participate in, that there may be funding opportunities to fund some of the school lunch programs through the summer. So moving those expenses into a separate line item so it doesn't impact the Board of Education's operating budget, but we're tracking it and we're finding ways to be more efficient about our requests for additional grant funds or funding through the state or funding through the federal government is part of that strategy. And we can do that. I know that both Fiona and Sue Lebonsky were already keeping track of what every proposal that the state is making in regard to what a week schedule might look like, what social distancing may look like within a classroom, what distance learning may look like. And if they put a price tag to each one of those items, which is your plan B that you're asking for, that we can then be a little more planful looking at what's left in the fund balance so that if we do need to expend those funds, that we have an idea of what that maximum will be or what the ballpark is. So I agree with you. It's part of our strategy and our discussions with them.
Thank you.
So there's a motion on the floor with a second. Any other comments on the motion? Do you need me to read it back? No? All right, then I'm going to.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I heard yes. All right, so again, this is going to be a roll call vote to approve the total appropriation, a total appropriation to the fiscal year 2020-2021 for the Board of Education operating and capital in the sum of $76,837,593, representing a 2.31% increase over the fiscal year 1920 budget, with a request that the Board of Education bring back to the Board of Finance within 30 days a report on how the funds will be appropriated between us and capital. If there are no other questions, I'll do the roll call. Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Boynton?
Yes.
Ms. Pesky?
Aye.
Mr. Bushka?
Aye.
Mr. Bayes?
Aye.
And Mr. Anderson?
Yes, please.
So that's unanimous. So item 4 on the agenda, again, a roll call vote to adopt the fiscal year 2020-2021 city budget and the sum of $56,379,133, representing a 2.24% increase. Do I have a motion?
Mayor, so moved.
Anderson, second.
I heard Mr. Bayes. Did I hear a second?
Boynton.
Anderson, second.
I heard Mr. Boynton first, Mayor.
All right, well, I have Bayes and Boynton, so.
Yeah.
All right, questions on this budget? Hearing none.
Mayor, I have a
Roll
question.
call.
Quick
Oh,
question.
yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Are all the COVID expenses out of the budget? And have we
Yes.
budgeted revenue? Have we budgeted any revenue to cover the COVID expenses from FEMA?
No.
Okay.
No, not at this point. So where we are with FEMA reimbursement, the city's COVID expenses to date are roughly $160,000. And what we're hearing is that there is a strong likelihood that we would get 100% reimbursement for those expenditures. On the Board of Education side, those COVID-related expenses were roughly $400,000, I think around $380,000. And while we will advocate very strongly, particularly in regard to the school lunch program, which I would say is 100% the direct result of our response to this pandemic, and which is the lion's share of that $380,000, I think there's a stronger likelihood that we will see reimbursement for those. The technology piece, we're not sure. But again, because this will, if we don't get reimbursement from this again, is going to impact our fund balance. We will do a regular monthly review of those COVID-related expenses and those reimbursements. And that was the other conversation that I had with the superintendent and the board chair, is that both the Board of Education and the city can access that account. We can look at what those accountings, the budget performance reports are, look at them on a monthly basis respectively by both the City Council and the Board of Education, and then collectively report to the Board of Finance on that fund performance. Other questions on the...
Mayor, just this is Lance. Just make a comment. Again, these times are really kind of challenging, and for me personally, this budget has been one of the most difficult, since my time on the Board of Finance. That the challenges and the needs have never been higher. Our educators are being asked to do something that's way outside their comfort zone and doing something completely different. Our first responders are in harm's way more so than they've ever been, and coupled with the civil unrest that's happened in the last week or so, it's extremely difficult to sit here and say, yeah, we just don't have the money. The bottom line is we just don't have the money. So I'm trying to take the emotion out of this, which is difficult. I know what a hard and difficult and wonderful job that everybody is doing. I'm just simply trying to look at what's in the best interest of our taxpayers and trying to keep everybody safe. So it's been a challenge. So hopefully everybody understands that. I'm sure the rest of the board feels exactly the same way.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. I agree. I know that I heard repeatedly, both on the City Council and the Board of Finance, this is not the year you want to see any reductions in our workforce, especially when it comes to public safety or the teaching workforce. I'm going through this, the cuts that I need to find, and I am going to do everything I can to stay away from those, that impact on any of those public safety, police and fire in particular. I already identified in an earlier meeting, what vacancies exist in other departments and within the city that are at great risk of not being filled this year. But we will be mindful of the need to protect our public safety, and I'm sure that the Board of Education is thinking the same with their teachers and paras and what those demands may look like.
And this is Laureen, not to be a dead horse, but I'm very concerned about the state of Connecticut, and they're going to take fund balance to fix, to make sure that they can get through 1920. 2021, there's not enough in the fund balance to figure it out, and that's where Torrington gets a lot of revenue. We are a municipality that we're blessed to get money from the state. We need it, but we need also to increase the businesses in the city of Torrington. And right now, the ones that we do have are struggling. And if they even come back, I understand Lance's point completely, because I don't know where we're going to how we're going to fix this all. And it's never been more important to have all the personnel that we do have on board. So this is, I can see it in everybody's face. No one is comfortable with any of this.
Nobody's having a good time with this at all. So I can echo Mr. Boyan and Ms. Besky.
So I'm sitting in the dark so nobody can see the dark circles in my eyes. I will say that I've had a number of conversations regarding, what do we do next year? Because these are one-time revenues that we're looking at. This $3.6 million out of our fund balance, $2 million out of our internal service funds, those aren't going to be here next year, and we know that. And I don't mind telling you, while it was a most unpleasant experience to start talking about what are those expenses within our budget that can be moved out of the operating budget as a tax-funded amenity. And I'm going to come back to the trash. Last year we identified there can be $2 million in savings if we were to look at that as a user fee as opposed to embedding it in our operating and it being funded through a mill rate. So over the next year, I think it's going to be very important that we keep an open mind about what are those other strategies that we can use, because we're not going to have these funds next year. And if the Board of Education, and I don't mean Torrington Board of Education, I mean education across the state and across the nation, is revamped to the extent that we fear it may need to be, it's going to be expensive. And I can only say, thank goodness that this board of finance saw fit to, number one, adopt that policy that would grow our fund balance the way that it has, that we have been extremely mindful year over year and not allowing our respective departments to move funds from a surplus line item and spend it somewhere else. We were mindful to build this fund balance year over year, and it's here, and that's the savings account that we can rely on right now. I share Ms. Pesky's concern about what is the state going to do. Yes, there's a budget deficit on their end. It does concern me that they may look at a municipality that does have a healthy reserve, which is one of the reasons I asked the board chair and superintendent to identify what those potential expenses may be. Because if the state comes and says we're going to reduce the grants that are provided to the municipality, I'm going to argue, just as I did in 2018, when I went and saw Secretary Barnes at the OPM, to say, we are a distressed municipality. We are an alliance district, and if we can identify what those potential expenses are to meet those mandates that may be issued to boards of education, we can certainly present a good argument as to why they should not cut any of our funding.
And we are the social service hub for the Northwest corner.
The micropolitan center. Yes. Yeah.
I was trying to stay away from that word.
I know it's a double-edged sword. It's not always met with a, yeah. So if there are other comments on the motion, which was made by Mr. Bayes, seconded by Mr. Boynton, then this is a roll call approval. Do I need to read the motion again before I call it?
Yes, please.
All right, so the motion that you are voting on by roll call is to adopt the 2020-2021 city budget totaling $56,379,133, representing a 2.24% increase over fiscal year 1920. Roll call, Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mr. Boynton.
Aye.
Ms. Pesky.
Aye.
Mr. Bushka.
Aye.
Mr. Bayes.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
All right. On to item 5. Again, it would be a roll call vote. And this would be, I will entertain a motion to set the mill rate for fiscal year 2020-2021 at 46.1709. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Anderson, so moved.
Second, Pesky.
Okay, so motion made by Mr. Anderson, seconded by Ms. Pesky. Discussion or questions or comments?
Mayor, just to make it clear, this is zero impact to the mill rate. This is 0% increase, no increase.
That is exactly right. All right, then I'll call Mr. Wright,
Yes. Aye.
Mr. Boynton,
Aye.
Ms. Pesky,
Aye.
Mr. Bushka,
Aye.
Mr. Bayes,
Aye.
and Mr. Anderson.
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous. Item 6, again, a roll call vote to set the mill rate for fiscal year 2020, 2021 for motor vehicle at 45 mils.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bushka,
Second, Mr. Wright.
and seconded by Mr. Wright. Questions or comments on this? Hearing-
Anderson, just confirming this is the, that's the max the state will allow us, correct?
That is, yes. Yep, that's state mandated.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, Mr. Wright,
Aye.
Mr. Boynton,
Aye.
Ms. Pesky,
Aye.
Mr. Bushka,
Aye.
Mr. Bayes,
Aye.
and Mr. Anderson.
Yes, aye.
All right, there being no further business before this board this evening.
Mayor, I just have a quick question.
Yes,
Do we,
Mr. Bushka, go ahead.
do we have to come in and sign the rate bill?
You know what, I think the last couple of years I sign it. I think that's, I'll verify that and be in touch with you.
Okay.
Okay,
I thought we, yeah, we authorized the mayor to sign on our behalf at this point.
That's what I recall too.
okay. I was just about to take a motion to adjourn. But before I do so, and it's not an agenda item, it's just a question to the board. This board, I need this board to come together to discuss an appropriation for the THS building project and approve a referendum. And the timeline that we've been following, so we can get this all done by June 30th or before June 30th, so the board can submit their grant, is on June 10th. The Planning and Zoning Commission is going to be meeting for an 824 referral, and that's pro forma. It's a procedural thing that they have to do. So I'm wondering if you would be available for a special meeting just for this purpose on June 11th. Could I just see maybe by a quick available or not available? That's June 11th, which is next Thursday. I see a thumbs up from Mr. Boynton.
Okay.
Both thumbs.
Down for,
What was,
For me.
what was the date?
June 11th. So Mr. Bushka is out, Mr. Boynton is in,
Mr. Wright is in.
Mr. Wright is in, Mr. Bayes is in. Lorraine, did you say in?
Anderson, yes.
yes, I'm in.
Anderson and Ms. Pesky is in. So June 11th it'll just be that one agenda item. And you already received the budget impact analysis that Mr. Lindsley did for us. So I'll make sure that that's available to review.
Our
Yeah,
only comment is if we could do it at 5:30.
5:30?
Yeah, I'm back to work now, so by the time I get back into town, it makes more sense for me if everybody else is okay with that.
Sure.
No complaints.
Good. All right, so 5:30 on the 11th. All right, there being no further business before this board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Anderson, so moved.
I heard Anderson, I heard Mr. Boynton, all in favor.
Aye.
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 We're adjourned. Thank you all. I greatly appreciate this, and